brother. Mainstream media. Government cover-ups. You want answers? Well, so does he. Live from Austin, Texas, broadcasting worldwide, it's Alex Jones.
So James Wesley Rawles joins us to talk about this. We have the demonization with shows like, preppers. One of the prepper guys refused a procedure by a doctor. That's an article on Infowars.com. Had all his guns taken. They said by not taking the procedure, it means you don't care about your life. Prima facie evidence that you're suicidal. The guy's like, no, I just don't want tubes stuck in my chest. And so he's home healthy. And they just say, no guns ever again. No judge, no jury. You got to know, most of your doctors are spying on you now. That's on record. Most of the preachers are. We're living in the transition from a free republic into the Soviet globalist model. And I say Soviet because that's what they call it. It's not even communist. It's a corporate fascist system through Soviet boards. Soviet just means boards or committees. Agenda 21, that's what the UN model is. The EU's based on the Soviet model. The bankers gave the commies, and our government funded the commies in 1917 on record. Now, here's the article. Prepper declared mentally defective, put on FBI list. There's that report. David Sardi barred from purchasing guns after a doctor reported him to authorities. Now we go now to James Wesley Rawles. James, I'm kind of ranting here as I introduce you, but what woke you up? What makes you tick? Who is the man, best-selling author, James Wesley Rawles? And how did you write a book? I didn't even check the date. Was it a decade ago or so? Patriots that literally reads now like a history book because so much of it has happened.
Well, Alex, I'm a former Army intelligence officer, and I actually wrote the first draft of Patriots back in the winter of 1990-1991. And it's a classic socioeconomic collapse novel about hyperinflation, followed by a total collapse of society where the power grid goes down and there's massive depopulation of the major cities and lawlessness all over the country. I wrote that because I see it's actually a possibility. We live in a very fragile society with very long chains of supply, great dependence on technology, tremendous dependence upon the power grid. And if the grid were to go down for any number of different reasons, all bets are off.
Wow. So, again, it's been so many years since I read that first book, and I'm one of these talk show hosts that just gets somebody on and does my research live. But I'd forgotten, you were Army intelligence, so but even back in 91, you recognized this New World Order threat, and you wrote about it. How did you discover this? I mean, did you discover this when you were in Army intelligence, or what woke you up?
Yes. What woke me up, to begin with, my upbringing was preparedness-minded from the very beginning, because I came from a pioneer family that had come out west by covered wagon in the 1850s. So I still had that spirit alive in me. I also grew up in Livermore, California, the son of a physicist that worked at Lawrence Laboratories. And Livermore has one of the highest per capita number of bomb shelters in the country. There's a very high recognition of the nuclear threat there, because they designed nuclear weapons in Livermore. So between the two of those, I was already pretty well primed for the preparedness mindset. And then going into Army intelligence, I was involved with, among other things, some country studies looking at the fragility of some nations. And I came to realize that our own nation was even more fragile, because we have a higher level of technological dependence. We have tremendously long chains of supply. And in recent years, we've adopted the Japanese Kanban school of inventory control, what they call just-in-time inventory, or lean inventory control, where there's very little in the pipeline at any given time. And what you see on your supermarket shelves is basically all they have. There is no longer a back room with extra stock. What you see is what you get. And if the inventory control system breaks down for any number of different reasons, whether it's a transportation problem or a communications problem or just an internet problem, you're out of luck.
So we're 3 days from no food on the shelves in the studies I've seen from the Army, which I guess you were probably involved in. You can elaborate. 10 days from anarchy, 15 days from cannibalism.
About that, yeah. In fact, there's a bit of cannibalism described in my first novel. And when you come right down to it, human nature is pretty ugly. If you remove the trappings of modern society and law and order, there's just a thin veneer of civilization. And when you peel that back, what's underneath is kind of ugly. It doesn't take long at all before people revert to savagery. And that's one of the central themes of all of my writings. So that's why I encourage people to move to lightly populated areas and to team up with like-minded folks and to stock up in depth.
Well, you know, the media, the controlled corporate media, the globalist media, the occupied America media, they always demonize being prepared. But as you were pointing out, government itself and people that work in intelligence are obsessed with it now more than ever. And all the big money I know is leaving the United States, racing to mountainous areas, racing to islands. And even the news is reporting that. But we're still bad for being concerned.
Right. In fact, our government is essentially schizophrenic on the issue of preparedness. Because on the one hand, you've got the Department of Homeland Security labeling people who prepare as potential terrorists. At the same time, you've got FEMA encouraging everyone to stock up. So who do you listen to?
Oh, man. Now, I mean, you talk about the New World Order in your book that you're now saying you wrote 20 years ago. I guess I read it when it was republished, 11 years ago or so. Now world government is out in the open. I mean, you just type world government into a search engine. It's being announced by them every day, by the very mega banks. How did you wake up to the whole global government system? What's your political views on that?
Well, I've always been a conservative. I was a John Bircher in the 1970s, late 70s is when I got involved with the John Birch Society and woke up to the whole globalist threat. And I still, although I don't have a really strongly conspiratorial view like some others, I do believe that we do have the threat of global governance. And the natural reaction of governments when there is a power vacuum or disruption is to clamp the lid down and institute total government. That's the very nature of government. And if there are risks out there that would cause major disruption, people have to be prepared not just for defending their own family home and providing for themselves, but also the prospect of waking up some morning and finding yourself under martial law. And the other thing that I stress in my writings is it's only the people that are well prepared that are going to be in a position to do anything about it. Everybody else is going to be worried about where they're going to find their next meal. So by stocking up, you can be part of the solution.
Well, James, people ask me, Alex, do you really believe all this you're talking about? I've moved to the country. I got an 8-foot stone wall, and around the back of the farm property, I got a big game fence with barbed wire on it. And I've got food and I got guns, and if stuff does start unraveling and unfolding, anybody trying to take what I got is dead. And people are like, ooh, that's radical. No, that's just normal human nature. You talk about frontiers, that's where I come from. Most Americans, I feel sorry, I have that in their roots. But most Americans now, 90%, as you know, live in cities and are not self-sufficient. Of the 10% that are rural, I've seen numbers of only half being sufficient.
That's right.
And this is totally creepy because I've seen university numbers of 7 million dying of illnesses or malnutrition associated with the Depression, 7 million in a decade, and that 90% were rural then, or about 87%, and about half of those were self-sufficient. So we're looking at 45% that were self-sufficient then, 7 million dead. Imagine what's going to happen this time.
And that's with the power grid staying up. If the power grid goes down, all bets are off. If you look back at the Depression of the 1930s, you had a lot more people that were more closely connected to the land. Now we've got 2% of the population feeding the other 98%, literally. So if we were to see a grid-down societal collapse, most people don't have country cousins that they can depend on anymore. And the chains of supply are so long that we could see a massive depopulation. And if this were to happen, say, in the fall of the year, with power grid going down, if the grid didn't come back up quickly, by the next spring, we could see half of the population of the United States dead.
I want to go over those numbers with you. Best-selling author of fiction and nonfiction books, James Wesley Rawles, is our guest. Survivors, a novel of the coming collapse, is available at Infowars.com. And then this book that we've got to carry, James Wesley Rawles, How to Survive Into the World as We Know It, available everywhere. Tactics, techniques, and technologies for uncertain times. But I think more than just having food and guns and water, you need to be around, like you said, neighbors that are ready as well for mutual defense, because
absolutely.
I mean, we're talking about, I'm sure you've seen the Rockefeller Foundation award-winning movie based on the novel The Road, which from my study is very accurate with how humans would act within 15 days.
Yeah, it's kind of a bleak outlook, but yes, that is human nature at its core when you come right down to it. And that's why it is important that people team up. You need to form a neighborhood watch on steroids. You need to team up with your neighbors, like-minded friends, fellow congregants of your church, and plan. Figure out what skills exist within your group, cross-train each other, and for any skills that are missing, people need to go out and get that training and then come back and cross-train everyone else. They need to go to places like Gun Sight and Front Sight for firearms courses and come back and cross-train everyone else. You need to have at least one member of your very local community, I'm talking a cluster of houses, that is trained as an EMT or paramedic. And that's as simple as enough as joining a local volunteer fire department, and they'll give you the training free.
Yeah, even swim teams give you that. I mean, you can go to the fire department, you don't have to join usually, and they'll give free clinics on it.
Sure, yeah, they do CPR classes and everything else. It's important that people get the training to go with all this gear. I try to stress in my blog, I do a blog every day called survivalblog.com. I try to stress in my writings every day that you need more than just the gear. You need the training that goes with it. Because owning a gun doesn't make you a shooter any more than owning a surfboard makes you a surfer. There's a lot of skill that you need to acquire, and those are perishable skills.
Well, that's a good point about perishable. When I was 12 years old, literally could shoot to the same hole at 200 yards with a rifle. Now I'm lucky at 200 yards to be able to hit bullseye just because I don't have time to be shooting. I only shoot 3-4 times a year now, and you're right. We all need to constantly stay ready and also be mentally prepared. You know, think through scenarios and have defaults of what you're going to do in certain scenarios so you're not thinking, what am I going to do as guys come climbing over your fence? You're going to have to open up on them.
If you're thinking through those problems as they happen, you're behind the power curve. You really need to plan ahead and train, prepare, lay in the logistics. And in terms of things like retreat security, you need to buy things like night vision gear and buy a Dakota Alert, which is an infrared intrusion detection system. You need to do that now, because if you wait until after a societal collapse, you think you'll be able to buy a Starlight scope on the open market? It would cost a king's ransom.
Well, there was an article yesterday I meant to get to. Guys, will you print it? I think the headline's like 40 things that Detroit's collapse tells us about our collapse. Because I want to go over some of those with our guest. Because if you look at Detroit, they had, what, a 79% increase in just the last year in justifiable homicides. I mean, this is already happening in major U.S. cities. Yeah,
if you look at Detroit as kind of a bellwether for at least urban areas, that's kind of indicative of the path that our nation is on. And that's yet another reason why I recommend moving to lightly populated farming areas. You want to be away from the metropolitan areas because that's where 99% of the problems are going to exist. There won't be rioting in small towns. There won't be looting in small towns to speak of, even if the grid goes down. But if you're in an urban or even a suburban area, watch out, because you're kind of at ground zero.
Well, don't the studies show, though, that because most people even in rural areas aren't sufficient, that within 3 to 4 to 6 months, there will start being criminal groups, but sometimes there
will be, but the chances of them coming to your door are statistically so much smaller out in the country. then, if you stay in the city or you stay in the suburbs, you're just another notch on the food chain. At least in the countryside, you'll have some delay. You'll have some time to team up with neighbors, establish good security before trouble comes your way. In the big city, the trouble will be there within 2 or 3 days. You won't have time to organize and prepare.
Yeah, this is from the Coming Collapse blog, and it's got the numbers and links to the Detroit Free Press and others. But when the economy falls apart, desperate people will do desperate things, and many homeowners will fight back. Justifiable homicide in Detroit rose a staggering 79% just last year alone. And now in some of these areas, the police are saying get guns, protect yourself. But I've seen other areas where they're saying don't get guns. Yeah, we're laying half the cops off. The other half are just going to do revenue generating. So you're on your own. We're not going to respond to these 35 crimes in Oakland. But don't you dare have a gun and defend yourself. What an immoral, sick position of the liberals.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's the whole statist mindset, which is they make everyone dependent, but then they don't have any guarantee of government services. If you look at places like Detroit, the response times, even for violent crimes, stretch out into hours. Well, if you have to wait hours before the police arrive, all they're basically good for is filling out paperwork and toting off the body bags. You have to depend on yourself. It's essentially yo-yo time. You're on your own.
Now, obviously, if a solar flare hit us directly, that could blow out a lot of the power grid. We've gone over the transformers and the rest of it. There could be a nuclear war. They're trying to start war with Iran right now. Russia and China are threatening. But for me, it's just the economic collapse that if we did have another depression, I mean, we're already seeing a lot of stuff unravel, and we saw the government couldn't take care of Katrina. I mean, are you saying this collapse is going to happen, or the probability's gone up?
I can't say with any certainty. All I can say is that there is a risk. And if I was an actuarial accountant in the insurance business, I wouldn't want to be issuing policies for governments. How's that? Now, you mentioned the power grid going down. You mentioned EMP, and you mentioned solar flares. But there's one other way the power grid could go down that most people don't realize, and that is a malicious hacker attack could get into the SCADA software, which is the system control and data acquisition software that controls the power grid, all the way from the power plants and the hydroelectric dams all the way to your home power meter. There's SCADA software all the way in between now, and that's at risk. So, yes, if the grid goes down, we're in big, big trouble.
Well, couldn't something like Stuxnet travel around the world and come back and do the same thing? Because, I mean, they've said they want to have the government take over the internet to protect power grids, but doesn't that stuff have to be injected directly in, to the computers at a power plant?
Well, the thing is that when all the SCADA software was originally designed in the 1960s and the 1970s, it was before the days of hacking. So they left huge vulnerabilities in the code. And now, in recent times, they've created other portals into all of these software systems so that now someone can literally just dial in or log in by any IP address and go about their nefarious business.
Incredible. James Wesley Rawles, stay there. More with him straight ahead. Because remember, 20 years ago, he wrote about what's now happening. I want to know how he knew.
Dress up in your frock of yeller.
We're going to have James Wesley Rawles back on with us Friday for an extended interview on Infowars Nightly News, and we're going to get more into solutions and ways from his research he thinks that you can protect yourself and prepare for this. If there's a 10% chance society's going to collapse, then we should all get prepared. And I got to say it's 50-50 right now. And governments are saying that. The head of the IMF said that last month. I mean, they're talking about a road warrior scenario. We'll be talking to our guest more in just a moment. Okay, without further ado, I don't know why I haven't ever gotten this guy on. It's so great to have him here with us, one of the leading survivalist expert writers out there. But I know you don't like to toot your horn, but let's go back then to Patriots. 1991, you're writing it. How did you write about global governance coming via economic collapse? Because reading, The Patriot, and now the sequel, Survivors, or Patriots, there it is. I mean, how did you know in 1991? And then I was asking you, you believe in the global government threat, but not that it's conspiratorial, and you were making the point that, no, it's just a system. It's not that it's in total control and under every rock, and I agree with you. It's that it's from the top, the compartmentalized system. They're trying to get control. They're trying to establish global government. It's not here yet. We can still reverse it. Please get into how you knew all this, how you broke it down, and then all the other facets of how you see these threats unfolding, including like where they try to crash the economy, you were saying during the break, and then that backfires on them. Please continue.
Well, I just see it as a logical progression. We live in a very fragile society. We have a system where our constitutional government is at risk. Anytime there's major disruption, there's always the possibility that someone may try to step in to, quote, restore order, unquote, and you end up with a government that's far, far worse, that you end up with total government. And I think people need to be vigilant, and if they're vigilant and well-prepared, they'll be in a position to hopefully speak up and do something about it. In a worst case, we could end up with a situation like I described in Patriots and in Survivors, where you end up with a power vacuum that's created by economic collapse, and a foreign occupying army comes in to restore order, and then you end up, as I described in Patriots, in a war of resistance, a guerrilla warfare situation where you're trying to restore constitutional government. God forbid we ever get to that point, but I think people need to be prepared even for that.
All right, let me stop you there. My frustration with great guests like yourself that are telling the truth is that everything you say, there's 50 points I want to make backing you up. But people can pull this up. The Banff, Canada, 2006 North American Union SPP meeting. Judicial Watch sued, got thousands of pages of documents, or right at about 1,000 pages, actually. And in there, the first thing they say in the meeting is, this is in my film Endgame, screenshots of it, A, keep this secret. We're going to have North American Union integration by stealth, but we're going to use military crises, drug crises, flu crises, economic crises to merge the governments. And now they're already doing that with cross regions with the drug war. And that's being announced. And they say, we'll use each other's foreign troops and each other's nations. And now it was always, oh, I was at a military base and the general said, get ready for the New World Order, to now we have the videos. We have the news articles where, generals questioned by Congress about plan for I-4 troops during crises, or Mexican troops to be used to fight U.S. terrorists, or NLEO-9, FEMA press release. 14 countries working with FEMA to drill on suppressing uprisings. John Ward Defense Authorization Act saying it's to suppress the states. The governor's councils, the rural councils, right out of Red Dawn, the tattletale squads, the clergy response teams. I mean, they're setting up for a suppression of civil war. And it looks like the globalists want to have that civil war with the American people, and they're going to call us the terrorist. When they come arrest Alex Jones or John Wesley Rawles, or James Wesley Rawles, when they do things like this, well, we're just the terrorist. And I mean, they're the ones gearing up for it. Your comments on that rant?
Well, it very well could be a big setup. I think, though, that the statists and globalists may be setting up a situation that's going to get out of their control. If they attempt to orchestrate a stock market collapse, or a banking panic, or something along that line, it could very well get away from them. They could end up with a situation where the rioting and looting gets completely out of control. Government agencies are unable or unwilling to respond. You could end up with individual police officers and firemen afraid to literally leave their home, leave their families unprotected, so they won't show up for work. That was what I described in Patriots.
And that happened in New Orleans.
Yeah. And you also ended up with police officers looting, literally. I mean, they were caught on camera.
Well, let's face it. Our police are not as moral as they were, and the studies are there 50 years ago. In the old days, people were, not even that they were such tough guys, but it's like, hey, this is combat, we're going in. Nowadays, the whole culture at these mass shootings everywhere is sit there for 4 hours while you're told what to do by the feds. So now there's like this culture of being paralyzed.
Mm-hmm. Well, we could see a situation where, whether it's orchestrated or not, we could have a societal collapse. We could have things come completely unraveled. Again, the linchpin is the power grid. Things could come unraveled to the point where even someone who was hoping to be the one to come in and restore order and institute their brand of government, the situation could get completely out of their control. And we could see a complete unraveling where the cities become uninhabitable. Once the power grid goes down, there's about a 2 or 3 day supply of water in most civic water systems that's gravity-fed from tanks. But there are very few cities that have end-to-end gravity-fed water. They're almost all dependent upon the power grid. So if the grid goes down, the water stops flowing, the toilets stop flushing, and then suddenly you have a huge public health crisis on your hands. The cities become uninhabitable. Commerce comes to a halt. You have this mass exodus of people from the big cities, what I refer to as the Golden Horde, pouring out of the cities. And it's a situation where it's difficult to get the apple cart back on its wheels.
Yeah, so much time has gone into building the infrastructure that it works really well, but it's super delicate. And expanding on that, it was like 5 years ago, a hurricane hit Texas. I forget which one. They hit all the time. And Houston flooded with about 5 feet of water. And we have a ranch in East Texas family land about 130 miles north of Houston. It's about 100 miles south of Dallas. Well, Buffalo, Texas is outside Buffalo, Texas, and Fairfield. And I just happened to be there hunting and doing some shooting when the hurricane hit. And I thought, well, I'll just go have fun and go hunting during the hurricane. I don't care, because it was just rainstorm by the time it hit there. And I was in the small towns. They were reporting on robberies, people getting shot, and there were hordes of people. And I'm saying it's illegal aliens because that was the main group, because there's something like 5 million illegal aliens in the Houston area, just everywhere. The illegal aliens were driven out, because that's all I saw, and were robbing and stuff because they were pushed into the countryside and they were getting shot and stuff. And the news didn't report on it, but I saw blurbs. I mean, they were getting shot. And there were also some other folks running around, but it was mainly the illegals because they were driven out of the city. I mean, can you? So that scenario, I saw that happen.
Same thing happened in New Orleans in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. There were refugees as far as 400 or 500 miles away, and they brought this whole wake of a high crime rate with them, and that was just one localized area, essentially one big city that was badly affected. Imagine if every major city in the country simultaneously went through a major economic collapse and power grid failure. There's actually 3 power grids in the country, a western grid, an eastern grid, and the Texas grid. If the power grids go down, we could see major rioting and looting going on in virtually every urban area. And yes, there will be some pretty large ripple effects that come from that. I just pray that the majority of your listeners team up and be ready to hunker down. It means having a deep larder, being very well stocked up, very well trained, and having, keeping your radar up, basically, keeping an eye on the big picture, and being ready to at least rebuild, from the ground up, from your local area up, to reestablish commerce, reestablish law and order, and I mean constitutional law and order.
Well, I know that from previous events, when things get really bad, the police and others don't show up. And I cannot imagine what will happen. If the welfare checks didn't show up for a month, it would be burning cities. And then what's going to happen after the welfare class does burn down the city? Then there'll be even less infrastructure. It is going to be hellish.
Yes, we could. If you look at what's going on in Detroit right now, for example, where they're actually turning off streetlights because some of the suburbs of Detroit can't even afford to run streetlights. Then you end up, it's this cascade of events. You end up with a lack of police protection, no response from burglar alarm companies, for example. And then after after people have, cleaned out these abandoned houses, then they resort to stripping out the copper wiring. So they're literally destroying the infrastructure. So even if the power grid were to come back up, there'd be, the infrastructure would be so destroyed that it would be months or years or even, conceivably even generations before.
Humans without a job who aren't self-sufficient are like locusts.
Yeah.
It's a cloud of grasshoppers.
In essence, you're right, Alex, because that's human nature. I'm a Christian, and I look at that the human heart is desperately wicked at its core. And it's only because of the restraint of things like Christian faith and the restraint that non-Christians are under because of civil government that keeps them from acting like locusts. I just dread seeing a situation where there is a vacuum of restraint, where there's no control.
Well, that's another thing.
When modern morals, or lack thereof, we could see a tremendous period of lawlessness.
Let me raise.
Very ugly.
I agree. Let me raise the next point with you. What about what we see in every government and what we've seen in Katrina and other cases where they don't help all the people that are in the Superdome? The military comes with the police under federal orders to go into $5 million houses and blows safe doors off the wall and take people's guns who were there with generators and food. What happens when the system comes to commandeer our food and guns? What happens when the armored vehicle with the police comes down your road to commandeer your storable food?
Well, statistically, the chances of that happening to any one of your listeners is pretty small, but it is a risk. But people need to have a contingency plan to bug out. Everybody, even if you have the very best retreat in North America and you're completely hunkered down in your bunker, you still need to have a plan B. You need to keep your bug-out bag ready and be ready to get out of Dodge, because the last thing you want to be doing is getting into a gunfight with the local police or with.
Yeah, no, you've got a fake cache of guns and food you give them. You act like you're mad that they got it. I mean, there are alternatives to fighting. It's smarter.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Sure, yeah. We need to be wise as serpents and meek as doves. So, yeah, it makes sense to have a rusty old 30-30 and a shotgun to turn over to them if they come looking for them, and you have the majority of your better guns cached somewhere, well hidden, so that even if they, quote, clean you out, they're not going to have even the majority of it. They'll just have a small portion.
Well, the New World Order said they want a post-industrial world. That's their plan. It is pretty much designed. We're going to come back with our guest. His book is available at Infowars.com. It's Survivors. James Wesley Rawles is our guest. Incredible information. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to keep James Wesley Rawles with us for 20 minutes into the next hour. Then a member of the European Union Parliament, kind of a Ron Paul of England, Nigel Farage, is going to be joining us. You know, I wish this stuff wasn't true. And I'm so busy on air and doing the nightly news and trying to make films and trying to travel and all this stuff that, well, I'm going to be honest. I was planning to visit radio stations all over the country this year. And I'm going to go to Dallas to visit an affiliate and speak this Sunday. Find out more at Infowars.com/events. Before the tickets sell out, I'm going to Orlando for a big 810 where we're #1 to speak the 26th. And those tickets are going to be sold out probably even before the event if you want those. But it's a side issue. I'm pretty much looking at maybe not traveling any after that because the collapse is so imminent if it's going to happen. And I was talking to James. I said, James, when do you think it could happen with the whole financial thing? And he gave me his answer. And this is a guy who predicted this with incredible accuracy 20 years ago and how it would start happening. And repeat to me, James, what you said.
Well, Alex, I think that there's a possibility that we could see a repeat of the 2008 financial crisis in the next few months as things come unraveled with the periphery of the EU. The Greek tragedy, as they're referring to it, could get out of control. We could see a banking crisis, and a credit collapse that could go global. And if that happens, we could see virtually all the Western countries go down like dominoes. We could see a banking crisis, stock market collapses, collapse of bond markets. It could get very, very ugly. There's a huge number of derivatives in play. That's a huge imponderable, because that derivatives market didn't even exist 10 years ago. Now it's measured in the scale of hundreds of trillions of dollars notionally in derivatives in play at any given time. And the counterparty risk is huge. Well, what happens if one of those counterparties is a national government and that counterparty goes away? It's just unfathomable to know what could happen. And the risk is tremendous.
And again, the head of the IMF said something similar a month or so ago, but they're too good at what they're doing. They create the crisis on record. They sell the fraud. Then they say, give us more power, give up your sovereignty, Europe, America, and we'll fix it. But then it only implodes faster. They make bigger bonuses, but they're destroying their own golden goose. They're hacking it open greedily. When it's giving them a golden egg every morning, they think there's eggs inside. I think the point you made of because they're on record creating this to consolidate power. They've bragged about it. Those memos have been made public by Goldman Sachs and others. But they're going to fry things so badly, the bankers are all running to private islands with their own security teams. I mean, like they want to rule everything so much and have just so many digits in their bank accounts that they're going to devalue the value of the digits through their sheer greed.
That is a possibility. And if you look at the Hegelian dialectic, if that crisis at the beginning spins out of control, they lose the tail end of the dialectic, don't they? There will be no synthesis at the end. They'll be lucky if they survive.
They're nuts. They're absolutely out of their minds. But I guess that's what happens with megalomania. They just feel invincible. And it's and the power grabbing, they just can't stop it.
Well, when you have all the money in the world, what is there but power? And yes, I think you may be right. The lust for power may be their own undoing.
And ours as well, because when this thing falls, it's like the Parthenon coming down on your head with a ton of bricks. Back in 60 seconds, third hour straight ahead. The book Survivor, available at Infowars.com. Survivors. James Wesley Rawles, author of Survivors, a novel of the coming collapse, with us. You can get his book at Infowars.com. In bookstores everywhere. I mean, I was in the bookstore the other day and saw it there on the end cap. But again, it's just so creepy. It's one thing to know, hey, grandpa's got cancer, that he's going to be dead. And then 6 months passes and you're there at the deathbed and and they're dying in front of you. Or, hey, your buddy's in the hospital, he's, they're in a car wreck, he's probably not going to make it. You show up, 5 minutes after you're there, the person dies in front of you. Or you see a car running a red light and it seems like 5 minutes in those 3 seconds before it hits you, and your collarbone's broken. It's like that. It's the slow motion of the New World Order and the twilight zoneness of world government being announced, and coffee shop owners being said, call Homeland Security if somebody pays cash, and TSA groping women and saying they're not. James, I mean, do you not ever pinch yourself at how twilight zone-y this has gotten and then think, my gosh, we aren't even into this yet? Our hand isn't even all the way. We've kind of stuck our arm in the badger hole, and now we hear him growling. But he hasn't even bitten into our fingers yet. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I see your point, Alex. We are kind of in a stage now, but I look at that of uncertainty. But I look at that as a period of opportunity where people can reorder their finances, get out of dollar-denominated assets and get into precious metals, where people can still go to a local gun show and buy a fully capable gun with no paperwork if they buy it from a fellow private party in most states. The window of opportunity for preparedness still exists, and the window of opportunity to warn others with venues like yours still exists. I think people should take full advantage of these opportunities while they can. We were talking earlier about what's your chances of finding something sophisticated like a night vision scope after everything falls apart? They're just not going to be available. So people should thank God that they have those opportunities to get prepared now. Now is the time to sell that flat panel television and sell your jet ski and go out and buy yourself an M1A. Buy yourself 6 months or a year's worth of food. You have the opportunity now. Grab the bull by the horns, because a couple of years from now, you'll be thanking yourself. In fact, your children will be thanking you. And if you don't, your children will be asking, why didn't you?
Yeah, folks, go to twitter.com/Real Alex Jones. You can see me shooting my M1. Just awesome firearm, incredibly accurate with open sights. A lot better than Mini 14 with open sights, or even a Winchester 30-30 or something like that. It is a heavy gun. We ought to talk about your favorite type of firearms. What's a good, really, light little rifle? Something like a range rifle or something, 223?
Well, I'm fairly fond of the M4 or M4gery, the civilian equivalents, but it's not a very potent caliber. For anybody who's 5'10" or taller, they should be carrying a 308 battle rifle.
308's got more penetration and more,
absolutely, yeah, much longer range, much more power, much more sure stopper, and it's also a big game rifle, so it doubles as a hunting rifle. 223 isn't even legal to hunt deer in most states.
Yes.
So,
I personally have the 308 and 7 mag and Lapua and 50 cal and all that. I'm just thinking for average folks, because, I know people...
308 rules. And the ones that I like the best right now would be the HK91 clones, because the magazines for those are dirt cheap. I do like FALs and M1As, but the magazines and spare parts are getting very, very expensive.
Yeah, I had an HK91. And then it burned up in a house. Stay there. We're going to come right back. I need to get an HK91. That was an awesome rifle. I actually had the HK91, not one of the clones. I want to hear your favorite clone of it that's a lot less expensive on the other side. Long segment coming up with our guest. Amazing info. If you believe in this information and want to support its viral spread, go to the Infowars Store at Infowars.com. We've got the new G.I. Joe Infowars T-shirts. We've got the incredible Pro Pure gravity-fed filters available at Infowars.com in the store. We've got a new DVD, Scientists Under Attack, the Don't Tread on Me flag. We've got all sorts of different bumper stickers to help spread the rebellion virally. It's all there. Wristbands, citizen rule books in every order. Order online at Infowars.com today. The water filters, the canteens. It's all there. Infowars.com. James Wesley Rawles, expert on preparedness. He's written the book, How to Survive the End of the World as We Know It. Not the end of the world, the end of the world as we know it. World War II killed over 100 million people, including 20 million Germans in that collapse. Democide, governments killed over 260 million people in the last century. Government is the #1 cause of death, and government collapse is, well, the biggest for the Ukrainians and others. All right, the 12 minutes we've got left, you got the floor. You want to get into preparedness? Let's get into the best firearms training areas, and then basics for people that do live in cities. If somebody can get to the country, give us the top 10 list of what to do to get ready, Mr. Rawles.
Well, I'd say even ahead of firearms, it's important to have a good quality water filter, like either a compact Katadyn filter, or for your house, a big ceramic filter like a big Berkey. Water filtration has to be the very top of your list, followed by food storage. But then, yes, you have to be ready to defend what you have, and I'm a big believer in 308 battle rifles. I like the HK91 clones, either the Vector or the PTR 91 are both quite good. They use original G3 part sets. It's just all built on an American receiver because the import restrictions, and the original guns were full auto. These are semi-auto only. I think the HK is probably the way to go now, the HK clones, because the magazines and spare parts for so many of the other 308 battle rifles have gotten prohibitively expensive. A spare parts set for an M1A is now a $600 or $700 proposition. But with an HK clone, the parts are readily available, and the magazines are just plain dirt cheap. You can get them for as low as $1 a piece. But you go buying magazines for an M1A, you're talking $20. For a FAL, you're talking $25. And for an AR-10, as much as $30. So I like the HK clones. In terms of handguns, I'm a big believer in .45 automatics, and even though I was a real diehard 1911 shooter for many, many years, I finally made the transition, and I'm now recommending either the Glock Model 21, which is a .45 automatic, or the Springfield Armory XD 45. Both of those are high-capacity, 13-round .45 automatic pistols that are very, very reliable. Beyond that, of course, communications equipment, first aid gear, and all the training to go with it. For all this stuff, don't think just because you bought the gear that you're ready. You really need to train with it, practice with it, know it inside and out. Get the best quality training you can. Go get training at places like Gunsight in Arizona or Front Sight in Nevada or Thunder Ranch in Oregon. There's some really good training out there, or work with one of the mobile trainers. It's really important that you get the training to go with this gear.
I agree with you. Expanding on that, what about the component of waking people up in your area so that they're aware of this threat? Even if they laugh at you up front, then once things unravel, they'll start listening to you. But then there's the catch-22. If they didn't get ready, they're not going to be prepared. They're going to be demanding you take care of them.
Well, that's why I recommend that people keep a low profile. I'm all for charity, and I think it's really important that people stock up. I have a 3-year supply for my family here at the ranch, but I don't look at that as a 3-year supply for one family. I look at that as a 1-year supply for 3 families. Be ready to dispense charity, but be ready to do so through an intermediary so you can keep a low profile. You want to dispense that charity through your local church, for example, quietly. You just get together with your church elders and say, okay, I've got some extra food. I want to make it available. I don't want my name to ever be mentioned. That's my take on charity.
Because you know the old African saying, no good deed goes unpunished.
Yes, and the old Japanese proverb, the nail that sticks up gets hammered down. So it's important that people do stock up in depth and be prepared. And, you might want to get set up with a good old-fashioned hand-cranked mimeograph machine and a couple of good old-fashioned manual typewriters, because you may have to make a local newspaper with no power grid out there to support you. But you want to be able to distribute information in your local community and be ready to do that at the drop of a hat. It's old school.
What's your gut on different variants of collapses, running from bad to worse? I mean, obviously we're in a depression and it's going to get a lot worse. This is only the beginning, but I mean, is a 50% chance this stuff's going to unfold, 80%?
Oh, boy. I don't like to put percentage chances on things, Alex. All I can say is there's definitely the chance for the worst case, which would be a grid-down collapse. But there's a very high likelihood that we're at the minimum going to see a decades-long depression that'll start out deflationary and then flip over into the nastiest hyperinflation you could imagine. So we're going to get whipsawed by first deflation and then mass inflation. That's probably the most likely course of events. But that outside chance, that outlier, that black swan, is the possibility of a grid-down collapse. And if you're prepared for the absolute worst case, or a grid-down collapse, then you can take anything lesser in stride.
Don't let me interrupt. Continue with how people get ready.
Well, I suggest that people study up as best they can. Yeah, I like selling copies of my book, but people can get to my blog and dig in through the archives free of charge. Again, it's survivalblog.com. There's thousands and thousands of articles, all available free of charge. Dig in. You have no excuse. I mean, even if you're unemployed and have to use a library computer, you can get on the Internet and dig in and research this stuff. Stock up to the best of your ability, as best as your budget will allow. Team up with like-minded people in your church and your neighbors, your family members, whoever. Do so quietly. You don't want to start some enormous local organization then put a target on your back, but very quietly team up with your neighbors, stock up, train, cross-train with the skills that are available within your group. There's probably someone who's prior service, military. They can teach, small unit tactics and things like NBC. You probably have people that are firefighters or former firefighters that can teach everything from CPR to how to save a house from burning down. Even the oldest member of your local community that's in your group probably knows how to do home canning and all those old-fashioned skills. And they, again, can cross-train everyone else. It's all a matter of teamwork, and it's a matter that you need to start with prayer. Sit down and pray about it. If you feel convicted, get prepared, study up, take full advantage of the free resources that are out there, and do the very best you can to prepare for your families.
Author of Survivors, James Wesley Rawles, is our guest here for just a few more minutes. He'll be back with us on the Infowars Nightly News Friday. I would add I've done deep research on the very best gravity-fed stainless steel water filters out there, and I have chosen the ProPure as the best for my family. The others are great as well, but it's heads above. And by the way, we do sell those, and then it also supports our news operation when you buy the ProPure filters at Infowars.com. That's in the preparedness section. I never even talk about those. I should more because they're amazing. They're bigger, they're better, they're impregnated with colloidal silver. ProPure water filters at Infowars.com. In the few minutes we've got left, obviously Friday we'll go through your blog and go through some other areas. It's just that, looking at this, with the whole depression we're seeing, it's good to just have storable food in case things continue to collapse because you'll at least have food.
Sure. I often like to say that storage food is not just for the worst case, not just for a disaster. It's also for personal disasters. What if you get laid off? You're out of work for 6 months. Well, food is one item you're not going to have to worry about. You'll always have food on the table. Also, by buying in bulk when you buy your storage food, you're eating cheap. If you buy rice in little 1-pound packages at the store, you're paying 5 times the price you would pay if you buy it in the 50-pound sacks. So buy the 50-pound sacks, get some 5-gallon food-grade plastic buckets, and bucket it up yourself. It's common sense. It's a good old-fashioned skill, and it saves money.
I have one last question.
Win-win-win.
It is a win-win-win. I have one last question for you. I'm seeing a huge awakening, especially in the military and police. 70+% of donations for all the candidates that are Ron Paul. Do you see the same awakening that I'm seeing, and how does that factor in 1 minute?
Oh, absolutely. If you look at the growth of the preparedness movement, it's basically just doubling each year. Ever since Hurricane Katrina, it's been doubling. And there's a larger and larger percentage of our population that's catching on, that's waking up, and it's getting off their tails and doing something about it. All I can say is keep it up and spread the word. Get people listening to Patriot Radio. Get people teamed up locally, and train together, and stock up the best you can. That's the bottom line, because you really can't do too much more.
And I think that's why God's given us time, so the people like yourself and myself and many others who did have it put on our heart to get ready for this new world order and get laughed at, now it's all happening. Now people are finally listening because, unfortunately, we've been proven right.
That's right. Yeah, we're on a slippery slope, and our window of opportunity, pardon me for mixing metaphors, but our window of opportunity is closing. So make the very best of the time available to stock up. And first, get right with God. Second, get your beans, bullets, and Band-Aids together.
Well, that's what I've tried to explain to people. Folks, you better not take the Internet for granted. This show, all this. I mean, look, I moved to the country and getting a deeper well dug and got guns. I mean, I know there's a very good chance this is going to go completely haywire. And if it doesn't, great, I live out in the country. James, we're going to be talking to you coming up Friday. God bless you. I appreciate all the time. I'll say bye to you during the break, okay?
Thanks, Alan.
Thank you. All right, we'll be right back. You don't need me to tell you that humanity is in a deep crisis. Everyone can feel it. We know a tectonic struggle is now taking place between the forces of freedom and those who love darkness, bondage, and enslavement. Yes, my friends, evil is rising. But take heart. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. Recently, New World Order operative Hillary Clinton admitted they're losing the info war.
We are in an information war, and we are losing that war.
The globalists are scared. They've overreached. The future of the info war is in your hands. Join prisonplanet.tv. Download the thousands of special video reports, ebooks, and more, and get them out to everyone you know. Continue to spread the word about the broadcast on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and every other globalist propaganda platform. We are going to use their system against them. The info war now goes into high gear.